So today, as you know, we have Rachel and Emma to present on BREEAM Infrastructure from Ramboll, and after we will have the International Women's Day celebration. But before that, thank you everyone for coming. I will pass the word to Negin, who's been organizing this for 2 months now. So yeah, Negin.
Yes, hi everyone. Welcome to our first sustainability lecture. Emma and Rachel will talk through best practice sustainability frameworks for improving better outcomes for tunnels, and I will introduce Emma and Rachel shortly and hand it over. But please reach out if you're passionate about sustainability and join the subcommittee. We are launching a survey soon, so please keep a look out and respond to the survey. This is going to be looking at the state of the tunneling industry in terms of sustainability. So please do respond and collaborate with us to do a comprehensive study of that. We also running a workshop next week on sustainability in tunneling from a contractor and a designer perspective in the design stages of a project. That's with the BGA Early Careers Group and EGG Early Careers Group. That's next Wednesday evening. Please do sign up. It's both hybrid and both online and in person. It's in Leeds at Joseph Gallagher's office. So Emma Jones is the director at the Environmental and Health in Sustainability Carbon team and in Ramboll. And Rachel Jones is director at Regenerative Solutions team in Ramboll, which I'll hand over now, and they'll talk us through their insights.
Thank you, Negan. And hello, everybody. Thank you for having us here today. It's great to be here. And if I just flick on to the next slide, just a quick overview of the agenda, very simple, 4 points. Most importantly, the question and discussion section. So please, think about some questions as we're running through the presentations. But I'm going to give an introduction to sustainability to start with. And this very much builds on a lecture which I think Negan gave maybe about a year ago, was it? So hopefully some of you will remember attending that and will know some of the subject areas. So very much welcome questions at the end. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emma, who's going to talk more about how to look at a framework for sustainability, and we're going to give you an introduction to the BREEAM Infrastructure framework for sustainability, and then hopefully we're going to illustrate that with some exciting case studies as well. So just a little bit about me, because I think it's always interesting to kind of know how people kind of got to kind of be where they are. So Emma's going to introduce herself when she comes on to her bit. But I've been at Ramboll for the last 18 months, and I'm the director of the Regenerative Solutions team, which we look at everything around sustainability and pushing sustainability into all of the transport market work that we do within Ramboll. So my background, I've got a degree in environmental science. That was from the University of Sussex many, many years ago now. And then I went on to do a master's degree in pollution and environmental control. And as part of that, I've worked across a number of different topics that are covered by sustainability. So I've covered things such as site investigations, looking at contaminated land. I've done air quality assessments. I've done noise assessments. And that's built into doing a full assessment around environmental impact assessment, management systems. And then that's grown into the sustainability strategy, which we'll describe a little bit more about what that actually means. So I've done a lot of sort of training and facilitation work, and I do very much see my role as a facilitator. I very much don't know everything about the topic, but I know somebody that knows something about the topic, and that's really the role that I take within Ramboll. So that's a little bit of an introduction to me. I thought I would give a little bit of an introduction to Ramboll for those of you that don't know. I mean, it's great to see some colleagues here today, so thank you for coming along. So we are largely kind of engineers, design engineers. We operate across, over 300 offices now in 35 countries. We've got over 18,000 employees on that global basis, and about 1,800 of those are within the UK offices here. In terms of how we position ourselves, we've got a number of kind of markets that we cover. So we cover the buildings market, we work across water and energy, and also into the architecture and landscape space. We've got a very strong environmental and health team, of which Emma sits in, that supports all the work that we do. We've got a management consulting function that looks more of that sort of policy and strategy part related to our work. And then where I sit is within the transport market. And this is where we cover things such as the roads, rails, ports and marine, and of course the tunnelling space. So that's the market that I sit in. And this slide kind of illustrates what Ramboll's all about, really. And if you can read the quote there, it's being decent and proper does not only concern whether your tie is in place when doing business, it is about treating other people and society right in a long-term perspective. Now, this quote is from 1945, so these are our founders of Ramboll there that you can see illustrated on the slide. And why I present this is a quote that was talking about sustainability even before sustainability really was a word that was used very much at all. So it's very much inherent within the culture of what Ramboll has done right back from 1945. So in that engineering piece, we've always tried to do it with a sustainability mindset. So that's the introduction to the whole topic of sustainability. But why do we care about sustainability now, sitting in this room here? You know, why have you turned up today? Why should we care? Well, these are the classic photographs, which are very familiar to us, all too familiar. So we've got the flooding picture, top left. We've got the polar bear on his iceberg, can't get across to see his family or to get food, etc. We've got a drought situation, and then we've got an illustration of wildfires. They're all too familiar images, and this is the backdrop to sustainability. But that's also supported by evidence and data. So what I'm illustrating here, these are the biggest risks that have been identified by the World Economic Forum from 2024. And hopefully what you can see within these risks is that there is a very strong dominance of environmental risks. So these are the top 10 risks. So we've got extreme weather events, critical changes to Earth systems, biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse, natural resource shortages, and coming in at number 10 is pollution. So they're the environmental ones. We've also got a couple of societal ones there, so the involuntary migration and societal polarisation, and then a couple of technological ones, which are kind of new in, I think, for 2024. So misinformation and disinformation, and the adverse outcomes of AI. But I think it just strongly illustrates the importance of why sustainability needs to be considered in everything that we do. We need to take account of these environmental topics. So in terms of what is sustainability, you may have seen this kind of textbook definition, and hopefully it will all come up in one. Oh no, hang on, it's not going to do it. I'll go back, then you can read the words. So this is the concept that refers to the ability to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So in other words, it involves maintaining a balance between economic, environmental and social factors to ensure the long-term well-being for both current and future generations. And that's often illustrated by these three interconnected circles. So that's the kind of standard classic definition, textbook definition of sustainability. What I want to do, though, is just sort of broaden that out a little bit and think about it in development terms. So traditionally, developments are very good at covering a piece of land in concrete, putting a concrete base down, maybe putting a building on top, without not too much care for where that's located in terms of the biodiversity and the nature, and not always where it's located from a community perspective either. We're also very good at putting roads in place and, again, dividing, well, it might be connecting communities, but it might be dividing up areas of habitat. So that is how we've traditionally looked at developments. So it's traditionally done quite a lot of harm from an environmental perspective. Sustainability now is about doing less harm, so prioritising the efficiency of existing models and habitual workflows, and this concept of net zero. So this is where we start talking about things around the environmental impact that we're having in development. So do we consider the type of materials we're using? Do we consider the location of where the development is? What impact that might have in terms of the habitat? What are the type of materials we're using and what's the carbon content? Can we use better materials? So this is where we're moving towards the concept of trying to minimise the harm that we're causing or neutralising the harm. And then moving into the middle section there, the net positive bit is about doing more good. And this is really where we're trying to sort of move the concept of sustainability. So this is where we're trying to now benefit biodiversity and to look at using much lower carbon materials and to generate more resources than we actually extract. And then moving further to the right, this is the concept around a circular economy, which you may have heard of. So this is about keeping the resources in flow, so decoupling growth from consumption. So you're not just taking materials out the ground and ultimately ending up with materials back in the ground. You're trying to reuse and recycle and rethink the materials that you're using. And then ultimately we move into a regenerative cycle. So this is having a net positive kind of impact in terms of on the carbon you use, the materials you use, biodiversity and for society. So I want you to just sort of hold that in mind as we go forward. So it is the social, environmental and economic impacts. But if you think about it as a concept of doing less harm, moving towards more good, as we go into some of the further topics. I use this slide because it's really a note of caution, really, about looking at things in silos. So we all recognise this as a picture of an elephant, hopefully. But if you look at it as its individual components, one guy sees the tusks and thinks, well, that's a dagger or a spear. Someone sitting on top has got the ears. It's a fan. You're looking at the trunk. It's a snake. One of the legs, it's a tree, and then you're just faced with the blank wall of the body. So if you see things in silos like that, you're not seeing the full picture, you're not seeing the elephant in the room, in effect. You need to look at the whole picture, and that's what sustainability is really all about. It's helicoptering above all of these topics and seeing them and the interactions between them. But that means it can get quite complex, and part of what we're trying to do today is kind of demystify this concept of sustainability. Yep. So just kind of linking back to the approach that Ramboll takes around sustainability. These, on the left-hand side, these are our four kind of, they're called the unifying themes of sustainability that Ramboll uses. So top left, we talk about decarbonising for net zero. And this is about accelerating the green transition. It's about renewables and new technologies. It's about decarbonising the built environment in terms of the buildings, transport, water and energy-intensive industries via sustainable materials and reduced energy consumption. Resource management and circular economy, bottom left. This is about designing for repurposing and reusing of natural resources, building materials, lifetime extension, looking at end of life and reuse of secondary materials. And then we consider biodiversity. So this is around the protection of natural habitats and biodiversity, restoration of nature and ecosystems, and looking to enhance those ecosystems. And then the top right is around having resilient societies and livability. So this is the social sustainability bit that comes in. So this is around planning, designing and retrofitting for a resilient, healthy, safe, inclusive and socially coherent society, cities and communities, making them attractive, accessible, and having that infrastructure and services that supports that, allowing ease of mobility, having clean water, a clean environment, and also economic opportunities. So those are the 4 themes of sustainability as Ramboll sees them. And on the right-hand side, I've coupled them together. So that concept of sustainability, bringing in the social, economic, and environmental piece together, we also do that within our approach. So, for example, you might use different materials. So the resource management and circular economy piece at the bottom there. If you use a lower carbon intensive concrete, for example, then that will help to decarbonise for net zero. And that can also have implications for improving biodiversity in terms of the impact that it can have on the climate changes. And also in terms of using different materials, you can look at enhancing biodiversity opportunities as well, and making it a net positive result for the habitat. So habitat creation comes into it. And then in the middle, the resilient societies and livability is very much in the middle, because, you know, most people like going out into the countryside and enjoying and getting some health and well-being from that feeling of walking in a wood, on a beach, etc. So we like having a nice, clean environment. We like having an enhanced biodiversity. We don't want to just walk in a bland field. We want to therefore use materials that are going to help us to achieve that and to have that society that we want for future generations. So again, taking a bit of a sort of a development perspective on this, and I appreciate this is an above ground example, so it's not, I guess it doesn't quite look the same underground, does it? So I'm using this example kind of purposely, but it just illustrates the point. So this is a typical sort of location in any sort of town or city, can be anywhere in the world. So yes, we're looking at, there's an underpass there. There's a tram on the right hand side. There's routes there for cycling and walking. Fantastic. It's not just for cars. We've got some flowering vegetation. We've got a green wall on the left hand side where some plants have been added to the development. And then on the right hand side we've got some trees and we've got some layered vegetation there, and also obviously we've got an area of soil. So that's what meets the eye, that's what we see. But if I click on, you'll see there's a number of other themes that kind of come into this. And I appreciate, there's a lot, it's a very busy slide, but purposefully. So in terms of what this looks like, if you think about those 4 unifying themes that I spoke about, the dark blue ones are talking about decarbonising for net zero. So this is thinking about the carbon piece. So the impact that planting trees and vegetation can have on being those sort of carbon storage and looking at carbon sequestration and the carbon sinks for absorption of carbon and helping with climate change. And then if you look at the paler blue ones, they're the links, or some of the links, to the resource management piece. So where we're looking at a green wall and the trees, etc., that can help us in terms of controlling the amount of water in a development, regulation of rainwater runoff, example, and surface water runoff. And then in terms of biodiversity, there's a number of impacts there. So the trees itself can be a habitat in itself. The plants that you actually create within the habitat can help with enhancing biodiversity. And it helps with the whole kind of nutrient cycle. It can help with cleaning and decomposition of harmful substances. And, for things like pollination, which is so, key to helping environment to progress, it's so sort of interlinked. And then the resilient societies and livability piece, when we see a development of this, you can see all of the different linkages and how that impacts you. So yes, you want clean water, you want clean air, you want to have a healthy environment. You also want to be able to cycle safely within these type of developments. You want the noise controlled if you're living nearby, so putting up a green wall can help with that. And there are safety issues as well that come into this as well. So that whole health and well-being piece is part of the sustainability cycle that we're trying to enhance. So a little bit around what kind of tunnelers are doing, so what are you guys already doing, and thanks to Megan for these, because I think you will have heard some of these before, we're hoping. So some of the concepts you may have come across it in development. So environmental impact assessment, the EIA concept. So before a tunnelling project begins, often you may need to do some environmental impact assessment. That's often conducted to look at the potential environmental impacts of a development. And that includes evaluating effects on ecosystems, air and water quality, noise, and many other factors as well. And the findings of the EIA can then guide the project planning and the mitigation measures that need to be put into place. You're already using some low carbon construction methods. So many contractors are increasingly adopting low carbon materials and methods of construction. So this includes using energy efficient machinery, reducing emissions from construction equipment, and minimising the carbon footprint of the project. The sustainable materials piece, using sustainable and recycled materials, it's not a new concept. It's something that's been in place for a number of years, but we need to enhance that. So that is being used within tunnel construction. It's we're not saying it's not common practice. We need to just enhance it. So this includes using recycled aggregates, sustainable concrete mixes, and responsibly sourced materials to help reduce environmental impact. Energy efficiency, obviously, again, another concept which isn't new. So tunnel construction projects implement energy efficiency systems for lighting, ventilation and equipment, reducing energy consumption and operational costs. Noise and air quality control measures are often taken to minimise noise and air pollution for nearby communities. These include noise barriers, dust control, real-time monitoring of environmental factors may be a requirement of a project. And in terms of waste reduction and recycling, the industry focuses on looking at reducing waste generation and maximising recycling of construction materials. So this reduces landfill waste and minimises the resource consumption. So hopefully these are somewhat familiar concepts to you. In terms of biodiversity and habitat creation, many tunnelling projects include initiatives to protect local flora and fauna. So this might include habitat restoration, revegetation programs, and maybe an introduction of wildlife crossings. In terms of community engagement, engaging with local communities, addressing their concerns, it's an important sustainability measure. Projects often involve local communities in the planning process and provides benefits such as improved public transport and local job opportunities is part of the engagement piece. In terms of water management, projects implement measures for managing and protecting water resources, including preventing contamination of water bodies and ensuring proper drainage and treatment of water is used during construction. And in terms of sustainable transport, reducing the environmental impact of transporting materials and personnel to construction sites, that's an essential component. This includes using sustainable transportation options and reducing vehicle emissions. And we all know the upsurge in kind of use of electric vehicles within developments and on site. And then in terms of the final one, really, the historic and cultural heritage preservation. So this is around tunnel projects that are near historical or cultural sites. There's often a need to take steps to preserve and protect these areas, which needs to respect the cultural heritage of the region. So it's not that you're not doing anything around sustainability, you'll be doing a lot. And as I say, hopefully some of these concepts are familiar to you. That's given a bit of an introduction to sustainability, what it's about, some of the topic areas. And in terms of when it comes into a project, our approach is then to look at a project and in terms of the key drivers for driving sustainability can take a number of areas. So there might be some legislation that impacts you. So you may have heard of biodiversity net gain. So that's the requirement driven through from the Environment Act in the UK, in England particularly, which requires you to enhance biodiversity by 10% on many developments that move through the planning process. So that's an important piece of legislation. There may be industry kind of best practice, what are other competitors doing and so forth. So for winning new contracts, we need to be very aware of what other competitors are doing. What is that industry best practice? How do we take that into the developments that we're driving forward on? The clients that we work for might have particular sustainable strategies, so they might have a particularly strong requirement or targets or objectives around biodiversity or reducing carbon, and they might have particular carbon targets. So national highways, for example, so they're the main sort of beneficiary client for a lot of the work that we do in the highway space. They actually not only set financial budgets on us within the supply chain, but they also set carbon budgets. So we now have to really be very mindful of the carbon that we use within our projects and development. So that client sustainable strategy and approach can often then feed down into contracts that we need to be mindful of. And then stakeholders. I mean, stakeholders are, yes, our clients, but it's also the communities within which a development takes place. There can be multi-stakeholders. From a tunnelling situation, you might be crossing across a number of different local authority areas that you need to take their views into consultation as part of the understanding of what the sustainability requirements are. So a number of key drivers, and this all builds into having a project vision, and that project vision might have a number of sustainability dimensions. So just down the middle there, I've got a number of the topics that we've touched on during this. So the priority topics are the ones that you need to absolutely take account of. Often it's a requirement to look at the amount of carbon within the development, being mindful of the type of materials that you're using, having an eye on the biodiversity and the impacts that you can have there. But other topics such as water use, the health and well-being piece, sustainable travel, and such forth, they will be important topics, but you need to look at the priority ones, and then put those in terms of a plan, really, a sustainability action plan or delivery framework, and move that forward into your project. So often when we've got developments, the location of a project and the sustainability ambition around that project might already have been set. So this slide here illustrates the development stages that we move through on a project. So often, Ramboll comes in as design engineers, and exactly that, the ambition's already been set, an outline design might have been put into place, but our engineers then take that, try and understand what the project context is, what are the priority areas that need to be addressed, are there any really strong themes that we need to respond to, and therefore are there targets and KPIs that we need to be mindful of, and then that impacts what we do in terms of thinking about material use, embedded carbon, what the biodiversity is, what the habitats are that we need to be mindful of. So we take that into each of the development stages, and then we have a role within refining that to maybe actually calculate something around the carbon, to measure the type of materials that we're using, the quantity of recycling that we're doing on a project, the amount of habitats we're affecting and enhancing, and passing that information on, reporting that information and communicating it throughout the development timeline. So although our role might stop, somebody else is picking up and operating that development, and that information then carries forward and needs to be managed. So that whole monitoring and feedback cycle around sustainability, calculating the data and communicating that forward into the development scheme is absolutely crucial. So I'm going to stop, and hopefully that's given you the backdrop to what sustainability is about, and got some mind thinking around what questions to ask. Emma's going to come and give us the overview around how you can then use the sustainability framework to take that forward and to go through the BREEAM Infrastructure scheme. Okay.
So it's just back and next. Hey. Hi everybody, I'm really excited to be here today. It's not International Women's Day today, is it? It's Saturday, is it? Okay, but nearly. So I'm going to talk a little bit about BREEAM. I'll tell you a little bit about myself as well, and there is a video with penguins in it in a minute, so that's an exciting thing to keep your eye out for. So I'm Emma Jones. Rachel and I aren't sisters or anything. We were wondering whether we'd be able to pull it off and tell you that we were related, but we look completely different. I've been at Ramboll for 20 years, which is quite scary. I am coming up to, I think it's 30 years, my career this year, maybe next year. And I'm a director in the Environment and Health, Sustainability and Carbon team, so that's a bit of a mouthful. So we work very closely in Environment and Health with Rachel's team in Transport. My background is I've got a BSc in Geography and a master's degree in Environmental Impact Assessment. I'm based in our Birmingham office, but my team are based throughout the country. And we've even got one moving to Australia, which is a bit unfortunate, but he's going to be carrying on working in the team. So we're all over the place. So we work on project and strategic level sustainability. So an example of that might be for national highways, we help them, along with people in Rachel's team in the transport division, we help them write their environmental sustainability strategy. So that's what I mean when I talk about strategic level. But we also do project level work as well. So that might be working on an EIA of one of their road schemes or bridge schemes. So that's what I mean by project and strategic level. So my team, we work on a huge range of different things. We work on infrastructure projects. We do a lot of that. We work for the British Antarctic Survey, hence the penguins that are coming in a minute. But we also work with a lot of corporations as well on their corporate strategies. So we work for financial institutions, industrial corporations, the whole range. So we do quite a lot in our team. Really interesting and keeps me on my toes. So I'm going to talk about BREEAM Infrastructure. Hands up who's heard of BREEAM Infrastructure? Anybody? Oh, that's good. A few. Has anybody used it on a project? Had it in, couple. Had it imposed on them on a project? Yeah. I'm the one that's imposing it, I'm sorry. Well, the client imposes it and then I impose on you. So there are a number of different BRE schemes. So obviously I'm talking about infrastructure today. At Ramboll, we've got qualified assessors for all of these schemes. Not sure about the USA one, actually. Don't know. But all the others anyway, definitely. So BREEAM Infrastructure started in this building, actually, on this floor. I think it was a room somewhere over there. And it started out as something called Sequel, so you may have heard of that. So it was sort of jointly owned by ICE and various of the companies that were involved in developing it. And it was launched in 2003. And I've been involved in Sequel since then. So a lot younger than I am now. I helped develop that scheme with the company that I was working with at the time. So I was working with a company called the Transport Research Laboratory in Berkshire, and we helped to develop the scheme. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I won't go through every slide in a lot of detail because they are very detailed, but I'm assuming people get the slides afterwards. And the BRE website's really useful as well. It's got lots of case studies, lots of tunnelling case studies as well. So the important bit about this slide, I suppose, is that BREEAM Infrastructure is a sustainability assessment, rating and award scheme. So it's not just an award scheme in that you go, oh, I'm just going to apply for that award, write a couple of pages and get an award. It's very in-depth assessment and rating scheme. So I think there are around 200 questions that you have to answer. And I'll go into a little bit of the detail of what some of those are about in a minute. So you don't just apply and get an award, you have to assess, and it's a self-assessment. So you assess against these criteria, and then you are verified by an auditor, effectively, that's sent from BRE to verify you. It's an internationally recognised benchmark. It started out very UK-based, but it's now gone around the world, which is amazing. Skipping back up to the top one, it's for all kinds of civil engineering and infrastructure projects and landscape and public realm. So I've done, roads, I've done water treatment, I've done some of the Olympic packages, Crossrails. I worked on the portals for Crossrails, which is probably no better than me, where it goes from overground to underground. I've worked on regeneration schemes where they're not actually building anything. Well, they will be building something, but the award was just covering basically getting the land up to the point, decontamination, to actually build something on it. So it's a huge range of schemes. So it considers the project life cycle from design through to operation. So it's, as with anything, the sooner you start, the better, and the more opportunity you've got to get a good score and to make the most difference. And it's to embed sustainability across the life cycle. So I'll talk about this in a minute. There are different awards you can get if you don't want to do a whole project award which covers the whole life cycle. And by that I mean the client has to provide evidence and justification, which sometimes they don't realise, which is always quite amusing when they tell the contractor and the designer to do something. We're going for a BREEAM Infrastructure whole project award. They haven't realised that they should have been collecting evidence right from the beginning of project inception. So you've got the client has to collect evidence, the design stage has to have evidence, and then the construction stage has to have evidence. So that's for a whole project award, but there are other awards you can do, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So it facilitates compliance. Again, pre-assessment is something that isn't formally part of BREEAM Infrastructure, but it's something that Ramboll do, and we do it routinely with clients who are interested in going for an award but not really sure how well they'd score, really. So we go through a whole pre-assessment process, going through with them where they can get some easy wins, where it might be harder, but we then set out a roadmap of how they can get there. And I've talked far too long on this side, so I will flick over. So again, I will not go through all of this slide. So about 5 years ago, the scheme changed its name from SQL to BREEAM Infrastructure and very much broadened out. So although it was a sustainability scheme, a lot of it was environmental, and a lot of it was quite pure environmental. So a few years ago, I think it was about 5 years ago, it broadened out, and there are now lots more about sustainability leadership. So section 1 is a new section within the scheme. So it talks a lot about going back right to the beginning. Are you building the right project? Have you thought about why you're building it, why you're building it here? Are there more sustainable alternatives? If any of you know Past 2080, which is a carbon assessment scheme, that is very similar in terms of, is this infrastructure required? Is there anything else we can do before we actually build? And as engineers, it's probably not a great thing to be saying to a room full of engineers, but it's just going right back to that, are we doing the right thing from the first stage? So yeah, the last 5 years, that bit of the scheme has very much been strengthened, but a lot of these things on this slide will be things that you're incredibly familiar with. So resilience, a lot of that is around flooding and climate risk and climate resilience, but it's around other parts of resilience as well. Communities and stakeholders, landscape, the very familiar things that you'll be familiar with if you've ever read an environmental statement or done any environmental work. So the assessment types. So this was what I was referencing when I was talking about the different stages, sort of client, design, construction. So very much the most common award that people go for is the whole project award. So I would say over 90% of applicants go for the whole project award. So the client has to get involved, the designer has to get involved, the construction partner has to get involved. In some rare occasions, one party might not want to get involved, is not able to get involved, or, you know, a contractor might want to prove to the client that, you know, they can do a really good job, so they might go for construction only award. So there's all these different types of award that you can go for. Whole project, design and strategy, design only, design and construction, and then construction only. But as I say, a whole project is by far the most common type, and probably well over 90%. So in terms of the scores, the ratings, outstanding is a new one actually that came in when SQL changed its name to BREEAM Infrastructure a few years ago. It just used to be excellent to pass and classified. What you tend to find though is you don't get many projects that get below a very good, because if people apply for it and then start realising that they're not going to get the points that they need, they tend to either withdraw the application or just let it sort of quietly slip away. So most of the projects get very good and excellent. Up until about 2 years ago, Ramboll had the highest scoring project ever. I'm not sure whether that's still true actually, I have to find that out, for the Bermondsey dive under. So that was apparently the highest ever scoring project, which is great. And I think that's probably everything on this slide. So this is the assessment process. So as I was saying, the pre-assessment is not really part of the formal BREEAM infrastructure process, but we would always recommend that you do it. So you can, you know, find out where you are really and where you need to get to. So clients find that an incredibly useful process. So the first official thing that you do going for a BREEAM assessment is the scoping. So you have to go through the 200 questions and work out which of those are relevant to your project. So you can't scope something out unless it's genuinely not part of your scope, or there's a reason that your project couldn't score against those things. So you can't say, and this has been a criticism of the scheme, one of the main criticisms, you can't say, well, for this project, actually waste and resources is the most important. We're just going to focus all our time, effort on getting that right on this project. You can't do that for BREEAM. You have to score against all the questions that are relevant to your project. If you are building an inert flood bank, for example, so an example of where scoping out might be relevant, you're building an inert flood bank, it's just going to sit there, you can scope out the questions about energy and use. So those are the kinds of things that you can scope out. So you work out what the actual scope of your assessment is. You do the self-assessment, which makes it look very easy there, but you gather all the evidence from the project team, you gather all your what we call evidence commentary, and you score yourself. So all the three different stages, so the client, design, contractor, you submit that to BRE, and then your verifier, your auditor, will come and go through that with you, and then you will get your score. Ratification, which is at the end, is a very short process, and it's more to check on the consistency of the verifiers, because we've got, I think there's about 20-25 people who are verifiers in the UK. It's just to check that they're making decisions in the same way and that it's fair on the assessment and the applicants. So that's actually quite a short stage. So costs is something that people ask about a lot, as you would expect. So you have to pay BRE for registration and management fees. So it's based on the project value. So you pay your fee to BRE, and it can be as little as £3,338 up to sort of about £45,000 for projects that are over 900 million. So that fee covers all of BRE's costs, sending somebody out to do the verification, access to their online tool, all of that stuff. Consultancy fees, so that's where sort of myself and Rachel and our teams come in. If you need a consultant to help you gather the information, then obviously there's consultancy fees, and that can range from 17 to 55k, again depending on the size of the project. And then there are some additional fees. So if you wanted to get a higher rating on biodiversity, for example, there might be additional things that you might need to pay from a biodiversity consultant. So this is just an example of how different rating systems might work together. So we work on a lot of complex projects, so we might be a part of a group of consultants delivering different BREEAM schemes. So you might have a consultant A looking at BREEAM new construction for buildings. You might have BREEAM Infrastructure for some of the preparatory works on site or for some of the infrastructure on site. And then you might have different schemes as well. So and what would happen in that situation, if it's working properly, is that people will be working together and sharing information and evidence. We know that the world doesn't work perfectly though, so it doesn't always happen like that. So a BREEAM pre-assessment, what this slide is just trying to show really is that the earlier you start, same with everything in life, the earlier you start, the easier it is to get a good score. So that's why we started doing pre-assessments a few years ago, realising that if we could get in really early with clients, when they've just started to think about the project, working with the client, getting their sort of management policies and everything in place right at the beginning, we were getting better results. So that's really what this is trying to say. So I think I've probably said a lot of this. So, yeah. So what we do basically, actually, I think the next slide probably shows it better. So basically we would go through the spreadsheet with you. We would look at the points that we think you could get in all of the different categories. We would look at the potential credits that we think you could get in the future, and then we'd work with you to come up with a roadmap of where we think you need to get to using that template. And so my biggest client is British Antarctic Survey, which is really exciting, and I've worked with them since 2016, which is quite scary when I think about it. So we started off working for the British Antarctic Survey in my sustainability team, just looking at projects, but the remit of our work has massively broadened out as we've got to know the client better. So, you know, we're working on some supply chain stuff with them. They've got a massive an organisational transformation programme that we're working on with them. We are doing big sustainability appraisals of huge sites, basically looking at all of the different activity that's going on. We're doing circular economy roadmaps with them, so they're deconstructing a lot of buildings in Rotherham at the moment and over the next few seasons. So we're helping them look at whether they can reuse some of that material on all the buildings that are going on. So I promised you a video with penguins. Right now.
What happens in Antarctica affects the whole planet, and what we do at the British Antarctic Survey is deliver and support science so we understand Antarctica better. By unlocking the secrets there, we have a much better understanding of how it impacts on the rest of the planet. The RRS Sir David Attenborough will be the most advanced polar research vessel there is. This is the first construction season we've had at Rotherham. We are building a new wharf, which will be big enough, deep enough to take the new Sir David Attenborough when it comes into service.
Planning logistics was probably the most important stage of this wharf construction project. When you work in Antarctica, you have to account for every single nut and bolt to be on the supply vessel. The nearest hardware store is a 5-hour plane journey away, so it's very expensive and not easy to resupply materials. It took a full 11 days, working day and night, to unload the 4,500 tonnes of material. It was critical to complete this as quickly as possible so we could start deconstructing the old wharf. That process took about 2 months and involved excavating the rock fill material, cutting the steel piles, the internal tie rods, the use of an expert team of divers as well to carry out underwater activities, for example, cutting of the underwater piles.
The main challenge to this project is planning your time to an extent where you can be sure that you're going to get your projects done within the very tight construction seasons that are there.
The next phase was to start the construction of the new 74-metre wharf. The wharf consisted of a skeleton of 20 steel frames. Each frame weighs approximately up to 55 tonne.
All the importance goes on getting that first frame in position. If you get the first module out of position, then it throws the whole structure off. These structures are 18 metres across, 10 metres wide, and they've got to be placed in a tolerance position within 40 millimetres. Within a marine environment, that's quite a tight placement.
The first frame took us about 12 hours to install and secure, and then throughout the season we got a bit slicker at the operation, and now at the end of the season we've installed 6 out of the 20 frames. At the end of the construction season we had to winterise all the plant and equipment, also putting temporary steel sheet piles in front of the wharf to ensure that icebergs don't damage the skeleton frame during the cold Antarctic winter.
The icebergs are interesting. They're a mobile mass that is a risk both during the construction period but also in the finished product.
This has been a very successful season. We are very happy how the construction has progressed.
The most critical thing to this very successful season we've had has been the teamwork and collaboration on site. BAS would help out BAM on some of their construction activities, and conversely, BAM were only too happy to lend their plant and labour to some of the BAS activities that needed doing on site. And this really helped create a community with no boundaries between the two teams.
It's all a case of people sharing their knowledge, ideas and proposals, and collectively, as a strong team, we come out with a solution that gives us the best effect.
In addition to that, the partners have organised tours for each other around their respective work facilities, and it's really helped build mutual respect and admiration, which has been key to making this project work.
Right, there we go. So the wharf is now finished. So that was the video at the end of the first construction season. So the construction season in Rothera in the Antarctic is really short. So that poses huge challenges. So we undertook a BREEAM Infrastructure assessment for the Rothera Wharf. So it was the first project to get at that time it was a Sequel Award, BREEAM Infrastructure Award within the Antarctic. So we were really pleased that we were able to help them to do this. So the work that we're doing at Rothera and for other stations for BAS is really to enable infrastructure for the next 30 years within the Antarctic. So the first stage of it was them getting the new research vessel, Sir David Attenborough. And because of the new research vessel, the wharf wasn't big enough to fit the boat. And because they've now got one boat instead of two boats, they needed a whole lot of infrastructure in terms of storage as well, because they weren't getting as many supply visits. So what people don't know is that the RSS Sir David Attenborough isn't just a research boat. That is one of its, obviously, a big purpose and the thing that everybody's interested in, but it's also the supply vessel for Rothera and for the other Antarctic stations. They do have a small runway, but it is a very small runway with a very small plane. So yeah, that is the main way that they get people in and out. It's the main way that they get everything in and out. And an interesting thing about Antarctica is that everything, all the waste has to be taken away. You can't leave anything in Antarctica. So it's a really challenging and very different environment, and really exciting to work on. So a lot of this is quite boring, so I'll skip some of it to the more interesting stuff. So yeah, we were really excited that we got an excellent rating. So we got an 81.3% rating, which was amazing. So 75% and over is excellent. We were told by BRE at the time when we applied for it, they said, we don't think you're going to get an excellent and we don't think it's possible. So we took that as a bit of a challenge, and the design and the construction team were amazing. So the main ways that we really outperformed, I think, what BRE thought that we could achieve was around protecting benthic habitats. So there's a lot of habitats obviously underneath the wharf, a lot of very valuable and protected habitats underneath that wharf. So the wharf design was changed. I'm just going to read my notes on this, which my engineers have given me. So the design that we went for ended up having a much smaller overall footprint than the initial design. So we got a lot of points for that. We reduced the length of the quay walls. There was much less blasting, drilling and milling, so less disturbance of those really important benthic habitats. And they were protected as well from rockfall as well. So there were less fatalities of those habitats downslope. And the way it was built also reduced sediment. So there was less smothering of those really valuable habitats. So there was a lot of material reuse. So another thing that people are quite surprised about is that there's a quarry on Rothera. So there's quite a large quarry on Rothera, which the British Antarctic Survey own and operate. And that is mainly around biosecurity, because you can't bring anything in to the Antarctic that is going to bring in invasive species, whether that's plant or animal species, because it will just destroy the environment on Rothera. So Rothera is interesting because it's there as, it's obviously a protected area, but I can't remember the terms at the moment, but it's classed as like a model environment for the whole of the Antarctic. So it's really important. So it's baseline sort of model environment that all of the other environments get compared against. So it's really important that we're not bringing in any invasive species which are going to alter that balance of the environment. So there's a lot of biosecurity measures around it. So this isn't a project I worked on. What I would recommend is, if you are interested in this particular project or other tunnelling projects or any other project, is to go onto the BRE website, because there's lots of case studies on there. So for the Oslo water treatment plant, BREEAM Infrastructure assessment was undertaken for the Oslo water treatment system. So there were 8 halls, 9.2 kilometres of tunnels and 4 shafts. The project also achieved an excellent rating under BREEAM. So the water supply in Oslo is really vulnerable, and before this project only had one major water source. So that's the whole reason for the project being built. I'm going to do some really dodgy pronunciation now. The scope of the works covered construction sites at I'm not even going to attempt it. If you're interested, go online and have a look. So it covered lots of different construction sites and tunnels with cast-in-place portals that will mean more to you than it does to me, at 2 different locations. So BREEAM Infrastructure was applied. So key considerations for the project, obviously being a city environment, were the scale of the affected stakeholders and the very complicated underground logistics. So the projects use lots of different measures. So they've got a custom ventilation fan with a system for reducing the noise of the fan. They did some improvement of the facade of neighbours' houses, mainly to do with noise screens. It was a huge project, so there was temporary replacement homes even, people were relocated, dust suppression, and then the communication with the communities has been really important, obviously, with all of that. And it had a huge complicated logistics operation as well. So there was a significant amount of traffic and transport measures. So another really important part of this particular project was the DRIV system that they used. So that was around optimising material use and resource efficiency. So they managed to divert a whopping 99.8% of waste from landfill, which is brilliant, including redirecting some of that waste to local projects. And there is a lot of that within BREEAM Infrastructure around working with other projects and not just seeing your project in a standalone manner. So a little bit like Rachel was talking about, feeling the elephant and things being in silos. So they reduced embodied carbon emissions by 2,310 tonnes. So that would be comparing the final design with the initial design, and they achieved an excellent rating. And amazingly, they finished 8 months ahead of schedule, which I'm quite amazed at. So a few alternative methods. So I've talked a lot about BREEAM infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure and projects, there are other things you can do. So we find that some clients don't want to do BREEAM infrastructure, they want something more bespoke. They might say, well, actually, in BREEAM infrastructure, you have to do a bit of everything. You have to cover all of the topics. And we don't want to do that. We want to focus on just a couple of topics for this project. How would we do that? So Ramboll will go in and we'll design them a bespoke framework. So this is a project that we did on motorway service areas. So that's what the extra sign is. So we used an integrated framework that was taking into account, took bits from SQL, took bits from other certification methods. Obviously, if you do that, you don't get your NICE award at the end because you haven't done your BREEAM infrastructure. But a lot of clients prefer to do it that way. They feel they can get a more bespoke assessment, really. So in my team, we don't just work on infrastructure in my team. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk about a couple of other things that you may or not be aware of. So we work corporately, so and in terms of financial markets, so in terms of investor pressure, there's a lot of pressure to address sustainability within financial markets and investments at the moment. So you may or may not have heard of something called EU taxonomy. So we do a lot of work around that, and that EU taxonomy is trying to get to what the definition is of a sustainable activity or a sustainable investment. So it's all around defining what sustainability actually means in practice. We work with a lot of companies to set their corporate strategy in terms of ESG, so that's environmental and social governance. And what we're finding at the moment in terms of ESG is that there's lots of different regulations, especially coming out from the EU. And I know we're not in the EU, but we work for a lot of EU companies, and these are still relevant. So there's lots of different disclosure legislation at the moment. So companies will have to say, what their carbon is that they produce. They'll have to talk about what they're doing to reduce it. They will have to say, well, what are our climate risks and what are we doing to reduce those? So it's that kind of thing, also to do with sort of biodiversity targets as well. There's a real drive at the moment towards simplifying, especially in the EU, these sustainability regulations. So there's something that was announced a few weeks ago called the EU Omnibus regulation, which you may or may not have heard of. Not strictly to do with tunnelling, obviously, but it's all interesting stuff. So what that's about is simplifying some of those regulations. There's a real debate at the moment in terms of sustainability professionals. Is it simplification or is it deregulation? And Rachel was talking very much about the World Economic Forum and misinformation and disinformation. A lot of this is being driven by, unfortunately, by the EU and the whole world moving towards more right-wing politics. Sorry, you probably wanted to get away from all of this political stuff, but the right wing are seeing, unfortunately, again, seeing environmental and sustainability issues as a bit of an easy target at the moment. And we're starting to see that come through in terms of things that are being called simplification, but a lot of people would say a deregulation. And that's left it on a really depressing end, doesn't it? Maybe I should put the penguins back up.
Put the penguins back.
But yeah, sorry. There is hope. But that's me. That's us.
Thank you.
Do I need to switch something on? Or are these just for show? This one's.
Yes. So if you have, yes. If you have any questions, please let us know. There is one online about tunnels. So Devin asks, when tunnels, especially non-transportation tunnels, are working, they are usually out of sight, out of mind. How to promote certification for projects that are not public-facing?
It's an interesting one. Are these on? Do we?
Yes.
Okay. I suppose a lot of it is driven, because a lot of these projects are out of sight, out of mind that we're talking about. So, you know, a water treatment plant is out of sight, out of mind. You know, when I was doing work on the Olympics, it was, you know, a lot of it was underground, so I was looking at the assessing the telecommunications network, the underground gas, water, and I suppose so. A lot of the projects are underground and are out of sight. So a lot of it is driven by the clients and what the clients want to achieve in the first place, and. Yeah, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
Well,
It's just a
I was just
tricky
going to
one,
say,
isn't
it came up on a conversation, so Rich is in the audience
Okay.
today. So this came up today, really, where it's like the actual tunnelling project might be out of sight, out of mind, but during construction and
It's
the
definitely
temporary
not.
works that's required, there's a lot of visibility around it. And
Yeah.
prior to that, the community consultation that needs to go on to,
Yeah.
influence how that construction is going to go forward. So there's the whole planning piece around that. There's the consultation with local authorities and other kind of stakeholders, which is important, which then makes it very visible, I think, and the community consultation that may impact. So the ultimate construction may be out of sight, out of mind, but there's a lot of work that leads up to that that's very visible.
That's true.
And it might be that I suppose that BREEAM infrastructure, it might be that a bespoke sustainability system assessment might be better for some of these projects, because you might go, well, actually, we want to focus really on the community part of this, or carbon reduction, or waste management, and some of the other things maybe aren't as relevant. And it's a criticism that I've had of BREEAM infrastructure, and I've said many times over the years that sometimes it's good for big projects if you want to cover absolutely everything, but other projects don't want to do that. They want to focus very much on a few subjects, a few issues. So yeah, there are options if you don't want to do BREEAM.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the BREEAM, if I pronounce it correctly, I think it's a horrendous job by. No, I mean I don't know if I used the right
it's
word.
It's not all I do. I wouldn't be this cheerful if it was all I did.
No, it's a great job to convert the qualitative kind of assessment of sustainability into a quantitative.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how much work has been done in the backstage, and which I think it's a great work. But at the same time, because you have those ranking system of excellent, good, not bad, and not unqualified.
Yeah.
And I just want to ask, can you make the reverse process, make those qualitative score back to a quantitative score back to a qualitative, more understandable kind of thing? Because I remember Rachel at the beginning of the presentation say the different stage of sustainability, like net zero is what we aim for and what 80% of the project aim for at the moment. And there's like reverse or like regenerative, that's like, so can you link your scoring system back to those categories? For example, if it's, I think in the second case study you present, it reached excellent score and it reduced the equivalent amount of carbon footprint by 2,200 like ton. Can you, like, is your scoring system, can that be linked to the equivalent kind of carbon footprint reduction? Is that a possibility? I know carbon footprint reduction is only one aspect of the sustainability, but can you make, as I said, can you make this quantitative scoring link back to the qualitative kind of feeling, which might give people
That's a really good question.
Better perspective. That's what I think. Thank you very much.
No, that's a really, really interesting question. At the moment, no, we probably can't. But that would be the next direction, should be the next direction of where these things are going. I'm going to think, but that's really interesting. I'm going to think about that one. But the simple answer is no, it doesn't do that at the moment. And it would be, so to move towards a definition of what a regenerative project would be, what is a regenerative project? What are the things that it would include? Is that the kind of thing that you're getting to?
Because since it's just so many aspects of sustainability, as Rachel mentioned in the first part of the presentation, sometimes when you convert it into a single score, it just escapes people's mind, like how that actually means. It's only a score, like. That's what I mean.
And
hopefully it's,
I mean, just to add to that, really, I mean, often we use carbon as the metric for measurement of sustainability, and there's a reason for that, because it's kind of one metric. And therefore it becomes a bit more sort of tangible. But actually, as we've described, there's so many other topics that are under that banner of sustainability. So I was at a conference the last couple of days where we were talking about, how do you measure that sort of sustainability metric better? So BREEAM is one scheme, but it does give you a very simplified kind of excellent, very good. And as you said, it's really, you go over the very good and, that's the tick in the box. Otherwise, if you're below that, then you don't bother talking about it because it's not good enough. But I mean, I was just looking at, back at the graph that I put up around, where would kind of BREEAM kind of very good sit? And I kind of think it's, we're probably somewhere in the middle around the sort of net zero piece, really. Maybe moving a little bit towards net positive in some of the areas where we're talking about biodiversity and better materials, but certainly we're not towards the full sort of circular economy and regenerative piece yet. That's to come. I mean, we can see that's the trajectory of sustainability and environmental impact.
I suppose one issue around the sort of regenerative piece is it's very difficult to look at that regenerative piece on a project by project basis. So it's how would you think about that? That's a really, really interesting question. Thank you. We probably didn't answer it very well, but
thank you for the presentation. It was very good.
thank you.
I hope this isn't too tricky, but do you think the UK needs a legislative regulation to identify and transfer sustainability risk in a similar way to CDM? And actually, do you think BREEAM could fulfill that? And how long do you think that would take to kind of get to a similar stage that CDM is in transferring that risk, identifying it, mitigating it, etc.?
Thanks, Luke. I think, I often use health and safety as the sort of where we, health and safety going back many years used to be a bit of an afterthought, a bit of an add-on, or wasn't considered, and the trajectory towards that and the legislation that's applied has really sort of moved us towards a better position. Sustainability, I would say, is we want it to be in the same place. We want it to be sort of business as usual for all of our projects. So I would say yes, we do need that. What that looks like, I can't entirely see at the moment, which is why we're using things such as frameworks to kind of hang that around metrics such as measuring carbon, measuring biodiversity, and those kind of silo topics which I'm trying to avoid. You can't avoid it at the moment because there isn't one sort of all-encompassing system. And I think partly because it is so complex, there's so many topics involved that it's very hard to get to that one metric.
Yeah, I don't think I can add anything to that. That was a really good question as well.
Thank you, good answer.
I have something tiny to add to that. I think the difference between the sustainability implication and health and safety implications is that health and safety impacts are a lot more personable. It affects individuals, while sustainability affects societies in general. And it doesn't present as a direct impact. It results and translates into a lot of different types of impact: global warming, resource issues, carbon, etc. So I think that because it's less tangible per se, it's harder to legislate it.
Yeah. I have a question about the situation at the moment. So how do you think changes in policies, like government policies around the world, and where the investments are expected to go in the next few years, how do you think that's going to impact sustainability and the net zero goal in the end?
Can I pick up on the biodiversity one?
Yeah,
Because I think in the UK, I touched on the biodiversity net gain piece. So that's been driven by the Environment Act, and that's really pushed the UK ahead of other countries. So the fact that we've got a piece of legislation that's forcing that view on looking at biodiversity and habitat. So an example of that, I mean, it's a highways example where not a particularly complicated road scheme, where we were doing a replacement of a roundabout and 2 spur roads kind of coming in. That went through planning, but part of the planning conditions was to have a 10% biodiversity net gain. So they looked at the baseline habitats that were occurring on the site within the red line boundary, and then they had to enhance that by 10%. So the problem with that if you did that off-site, there's a government credit scheme that you could use. That was going to cost £500,000, which suddenly, well, the project team sit up and go, this biodiversity thing, this nature thing is costing us money, and therefore that gets the focus on it. And that's driven by a piece of legislation that's, in the UK. It isn't in the same, it's the pressure's still there in other countries, but it's not legislative. So we're very much sort of leading the way in the UK on that. So that's sort of one of the sort of topics that's sort of pushing forward. And it just shows to give the focus on a topic sometimes requires legislation, requires that stick as well as the pull.
I think generally I'm hopeful that we're on an upward trajectory, or will carry on being on an upward trajectory, in terms of just thinking about what I was talking about, some of these disclosure regulations, is that, if you look at 5 years ago, companies didn't have to disclose anything. And yes, I think there'll be a bit of a blip in the next few years in terms of potential bit of deregulation. Some of it is needed because some of these regulations, especially coming out from the EU, are very overlapping. So companies are getting completely overwhelmed with having to disclose slightly different data for slightly different legislation. So I think this sort of simplification of regulations was definitely needed. And what we are also finding with clients is, because it was getting so complicated, they were putting all of their sustainability energy and time into gathering data to disclose it to the government, rather than thinking about the action that they needed to take. So that was probably the up note I should have ended on, that actually this simplification, if it doesn't go too far, and we don't know yet, literally the EU announced a few weeks ago that it's thinking about doing this process. If it doesn't go too far, maybe it will mean that more action is taken, rather than people just thinking about, well, I need to disclose this carbon data for this scheme and I need to collect this energy data for this scheme. Maybe they can put more energy into actually action. So time will tell, really. I think the next year or so will tell, really, on some of these regulations, definitely.
It's definitely maturing. So the carbon piece has been very much about carbon accounting, so getting a number. You know, what's your carbon footprint? And it's almost, so what, really?
Yeah.
As long, if you don't do anything with that number, you don't manage that number and try and manage it down to reduce, then there's no point collecting it in the first place. But I would say, you know, all the projects I work on now, it's about the carbon management, and you can't get away with just providing a number. It's the, how are you going to manage that? How are you going to reduce that? And that's where the focus is now.
But just going back to the sort of sharing of the risk that somebody asked, I suppose national highways, you know, the projects having a carbon budget, that's kind of a first step to that, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, like, as society, I guess, changes and the factors, or at least like how they are weighed, that affects sustainability change as well. Do you ever see BREEAM like reassessing their assessment criteria and maybe changing it just to make sure that it's still up to date with like how what it actually means to be sustainable in future societies?
Yeah, it does regularly get reviewed. So version 6, which we're on at the moment, was a big review of the whole scheme that happened. I think it was about 5 years ago. I can't remember. So it is under constant review, and then they'll have these big version reviews, and then they'll have incremental reviews as well every year, where a few industry professionals will review it and make sure it's staying up to date. So it is constantly reviewed.
I'm Helen Nattrass. I've been retired for a few years now, but I do a lot of interviewing for the Institution of Civil Engineers, a background in tunnelling. Okay. I'm a reviewer, and I'm obliged to ask the young candidates who come in front of me about sustainability. It's a big topic for their professional review. And I interview people from all over the world. We can do that now because we can do it on Zoom. And it's very interesting what sort of answers you get from different people in different countries.
Yeah.
And I always ask them about greenwashing. And some people don't know what that is. And then when I explain, it's making a superficial assessment that fulfills all the criteria but actually achieves nothing. How do your clients view this? And the general answer is that government agencies are quite publicly funded projects are all sort of trying to aim at something that's doing something in the sustainability area. But the private project is a completely different matter. And they're only really interested if it doesn't cost that much money. What they want is they want some green credentials to look okay, but they don't really want to do things that actually have an impact on the sustainability and the benefiting the environment, if you like. Yeah. This is sort of broadening the conversation. Now, you two work very well qualified, well experienced practitioners in the environmental world. How can you, with working for a worldwide company, start to infiltrate and really bring to the attention of people the importance of addressing these factors seriously? Is there something that you, working for a worldwide company, can do to really drive the topic home?
Yeah. Great question. Yeah. I think there's probably sort of two levels to it, really. I mean, certainly on a project level, I've been doing a lot of work on really take that bit about the key drivers, where you take the company strategy or the organisation's, most organisations have a sustainability strategy, and that's the, when you talk about greenwashing, maybe that's the bit that's the public facing sustainability piece. But then you look down into the developments and the projects, how does that translate down? Now, quite often, Ramboll is working on a project as part of the supply chain. We might be trying to, as an organisation, enhance biodiversity, look at better materials, reduce carbon. But then if that's not on the contract, and there's no budget, it then, you come up against a bit of a block often. So our approach is to do it anyway, as far as we can. So we'll look at like hotspot analysis around sustainability. Where can we make improvements? And we give those options to the clients around, this is a better option. Have you thought about this? So we're prodding and poking at that project level back upwards, I would say. And then the other bit I was going to say was it's around the thought leadership that we can provide. So giving case studies out back into industry. So the conference I was on this week, it was very much a collaborative kind of conference around infrastructure. And it was, I was on a panel with, we've got national highways, we've got different consultants, and we're all sort of working together to get the same messages out, really. So I think that collaborative piece, that thought leadership piece is the other part that we can provide back.
But in terms of private industry, we work with a huge range of clients, and some of them are really keen to do things. They all have different drivers, and some of them, you're very much, forcing their arm behind their back to do it. And that's why it's great that there are regulations and legislation that we have to, we have a bigger stick to hit them with. Not everybody is as keen as other clients, and that's why this legislation is really important.
I think there's one there.
Hi, Poonam Palam. My thinking is most of this carbon reduction, carbon control are all associated with human activities. What are your thoughts in relation to the population of the world in relation to the reduction of the carbon footprint? If you could share your thoughts, as in from the World Forum Economic Consideration.
I'm not sure about that one, actually. I've never heard a question like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess the point is the population's growing, and therefore our impact environmentally is increasing. I mean, that's why we're here. That's why sustainability and environmental profession is becoming mainstream now, because it's recognising that there's an importance in terms of what we do. And my role over the last sort of 30 years working in this industry, when I started, it was just very much why do we need to do this, Rachel? This environmental stuff, this kind of tree hugging stuff, the greenwash type approach. But now I find people are asking me, how do we do it? What are the metrics we need to measure? What are the frameworks we need to use
against other projects?
So I don't know if we're going to solve the world population problem here and now, but I don't know. I'm going to turn it back on you and ask what your views are.
No. I was only thinking from a perspective, the population has gone worldwide from sort of 4 billion to 6 billion, and it's heading towards 10 billion. Is anyone thinking, look, are we in a position to reduce this population in the future?
Yeah.
All of the options of doing that are pretty.
One-child policy.
So, do you have one?
I just wanted to go back to the point where you were talking about, the lady in front, when you were talking about privately versus publicly funded jobs. So I was previously on the Silvertown Tunnel, which was privately funded, and often you come to these lectures, and if it's about different projects, they say, oh, we've done this for sustainability, we've done this, but they don't talk about the cost implications of it. And coming from a job like that, which was privately funded and the budget was extremely tight, the programme was extremely tight, yes, we were considering sustainability, but obviously budget was at the forefront of a lot of the decisions made. And I think the awareness of the commercial side of sustainability needs to be improved, because young engineers hearing about these things, if they bring it up to their project managers and things like that, and if they say, oh, we don't have the budget for that, but that's a great suggestion, it's like, how do we start to imply that? And I think what you guys were saying about the legislation is obviously going to be a key driver in it, but if there's just a better understanding of how the commercial implications are to sustainable techniques. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the approach is to, if you focus on the resource management piece, then that's where it really sort of helps save in terms of the cost. So that if you're using fewer materials, then you've got a saving. If you've got fewer lorries transporting waste off site, you've got a saving in cost. So I think a focus on that bit. So there's a scheme I was working on recently, which was a park and ride scheme, and the whole sort of landscape approach was considered differently. So our engineers had an outline design of the park and ride scheme, and then went to site, and there was just a small area of trees, but mature trees, and on the outline design the trees were supposed to be just cut down out of the way, and one of the engineers luckily kind of went, hang on a minute, what if we can do something differently around this? And so is there another option? And then they sort of re-landscape, looked at the different engineering options around the site levels, etc. And they actually managed to save 80,000 cubic metres of the cut and fill kind of balance, and got it down to a near zero movement off site. And I don't know what the monetary number was, but it was, you can imagine the sort of number that applies to that. So I think if you go down that route and use that as the sort of main focus of cost savings, that's the best approach.
Yeah, it just goes back to starting early and starting that thinking early.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you all for the presentation.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
First one on innovation and sustainability, so thank you again for organizing it. A big applause for them. And I'm going to present quickly the announcements for our events. Today is our celebration of the International Women's Day, but on the 12th of March, Negin is in Leeds to do the second workshop on sustainability. You can join online as well. On the 20th of March, we have the first workshop of the year. Becker is doing it. It's from 2:30 to 5:30, and the registration is required. So you can scan the code here. Otherwise, the webpage is updated, and you can go there, or LinkedIn is working as well. In terms of awards and bursaries, we have the Lemby Memorial Medal. It's open, the application, until April. And then we have the bursary for the WTC next year, if you want to apply. There are two of them, £10,000 each, and it's in Canada. So this is the first social we had last month, and we will have another one in April. This one was in the Acton Depot Museum. It was quite good, I heard that. I wasn't here, but yeah, there were 30 people-ish going to the Acton Museum. Also, we have a day for the conference. It's going to be the 24th of October at Arup's office. We are already looking for abstracts and also sponsors, so if you want to apply, everything is on the webpage, so save the day, and yeah, if you know anyone or if you're interested in sending the abstract, please feel free. And this year, something we had from last year, we are using the QR code, so if you click on the mailing list, you will be receiving all the information for all the events from our social media team. So I would recommend to scan this code at some point. And then the book, I don't know if you have heard, but there is a book around. And today, what we are doing is we can go to the bar. You can grab the drink and the snacks. The bar is sponsored by Ramboll, Tunneling Journal, and Atkins as well. So we are going to do a session of speedy networking, which means we will have tables at the bar and we have stickers. So mentors will have a red sticker and mentees a green sticker, so we can identify each other. And we will have conversations and talk about life and work. There are other things going around, so there is a raffle. Tasnia got the papers. We also have a box at the bar, because I knew everyone was going to go to the bar. There is a suggestion box, so you can write something and put it there, anything you can think about. And then we have another paper with recommended books or podcasts or anything you think we could maybe enjoy. These are my two recommendations. I read these two books and were very good. So those are on the paper. And that's everything. We will see you at the bar.